This webinar was originally presented by the Tobacco Control Legal Consortium, a program of the Public Health Law Center in St. Paul, Minnesota.
So thank you all for attending our webinar under the Cyber Radar, Addressing Youth Access to E-Cigarettes and Tobacco Online. Hosted by the Tobacco Control Legal Consortium, we are a group of attorneys supporting tobacco control policy change. Some introductions today. Your speakers are Kathleen Hoke, Rebecca Williams, and me, Maureen O'Brien. Kathleen is a law school professor, director of the Legal Resource Center for Public Health Policy, and director of the Network for Public Health Law Eastern Region at the University of Maryland Carey School of Law. Through the center, Hope provides technical legal assistance to Maryland state and local health officials, legislators, researchers, and organizations working in tobacco control, obesity prevention, and injury prevention. Recent work has focused on the development of sound policies to create smoke-free multi-unit housing, regulation of electronic cigarettes, school-based nutrition policies to improve children's health, laws to protect cyclists and pedestrians from injury, and legislation to prevent injury by requiring seat belts for all vehicle occupants. Rebecca Williams is the Chief Technology Officer of the National Cancer Prevention and Control Research Network. Since 1999, she has studied the sales and marketing practices of websites selling tobacco products, leading the federally funded Internet Tobacco Vendors Study, conducting in-depth surveillance of the online retail tobacco environment, evaluating implementation and impact of state and federal policies on the industry's practices, focusing on issues such as tax evasion, youth access, which we're talking about today, and emerging products like e-cigarettes. And then at the bottom, there's me. I am a staff attorney at the Tobacco Control Legal Consortium, a program of the Public Health Law Center, and I provide legal technical assistance on tobacco control issues to folks working on tobacco control policies nationwide. So what are we talking about here today? Why is the regulation of internet tobacco sales important? Well, the harms of tobacco use are well documented, right? It's the foremost preventable cause of premature death in the United States, 480,000 deaths a year. And in addition, we can't say that e-cigarettes are safe. Nicotine itself is harmful. According to the Surgeon General, it can harm pregnant women and their developing babies, and it may impair adolescent brain development. Not to mention, it's addictive. Nicotine addiction is no joke. You've probably heard before that most smokers want to quit. And we know that youth are more sensitive to nicotine, right? It lights up the reward circuitry in their brains more intensely, and this effect fades with age. So we know that youth who start smoking are more likely to become addicted than adults. Or, as R.J. Reynolds would put it, if a man has never smoked by age 18, the odds are 3 to 1 he never will. And by age 21, the odds are 20 to 1. So if we can postpone youth smoking, if we can postpone youth exposure to nicotine, we might be able to head off a lifetime of addiction and disease before it gets started. But state laws that set the age of sale at 18 or 19 or 21, what good are they if they can easily be circumvented through online purchases? So our last speaker today, Rebecca Williams, will present to you the research of just how easy it is, how the existing laws are working or not working to prevent youth access to e-cigarettes and other tobacco products online. Right, and so this image here I have is from the Blue E-Cigarettes website, and notice how you can see it suggests the correct answer for your age, right? The green light is 18 plus. In small print, it says, if you're not legally able to purchase tobacco, please do not enter this site. So I guess at least they say please, right? And along with internet sales, we find internet-based advertising. CDC researchers found that the greater the exposure to e-cigarette advertisements among middle and high school students, the greater their odds of e-cigarette use. And so you can see here the research showed that 10.5 million youth are exposed to e-cigarette advertising over the internet. So here's a roadmap of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to have Kathleen talk about some state laws and legal challenges to those laws that have attempted to regulate the sale of internet tobacco and e-cigarettes. We're going to look at some federal laws. I'll talk about those. And then we'll have Rebecca talk about what the research shows about how these laws are working. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Kathleen.
Good afternoon, everyone, or morning, I guess, depending on where you are listening. As Maureen indicated, I'm going to do an overview of some of the state law provisions that apply, some to cigarettes and some to cigarettes and tobacco products, hopefully making those distinctions where it's relevant, all of which could apply to any age-restricted product. So if you're in a state where electronic cigarettes are an age-restricted product, you know, these are in principle the types of policies that you might have apply, laws or policies that are agreements with private industry. So the brief overview is I'm going to talk again about the state laws, but then also about what I'll call public-private initiatives, sometimes as a result of enforcement actions brought by the states and sometimes just through kind of discussions with industry to bring about change in policy. So as far as state laws, if you're interested in seeing a compilation, the best one is a bit dated at this point from February 2008. That was actually kind of the culmination of when we saw a number of these state laws being passed kind of between 2000 up to mid-90s up to 2008. And our third presenter, Rebecca, is a contributing author to this piece. So I put that citation in there for you to have a more broad access to what I'm about to cover. So again, since the 90s, the states have been adopting these laws regulating the internet sale, or we can say even mail order, or we can call it the shipment of cigarettes, anything other than the face-to-face transaction with tobacco products. At least 30 states have passed some sort of regulation, varying from, stringent and kind of loose. At least 2 have been challenged in court, and during the course of my presentation, I'll tell you about the one success and the one not successful law as far as being defended in court. So a couple of states have a complete ban. Maryland, where I am, is actually one of them, where there is, it's impermissible to directly ship cigarettes to consumers. Other states, such as Arkansas, may have this as a function of their licensing scheme. We can point to Arkansas as being definitive in that matter because they have a case that was decided in Arkansas that the court concluded that, yeah, that's the right way to look at the state law as prohibiting these transactions. So, again, you have some states with the ban and a statute and some where it's functional. The critical point here is to remember that you have to have your state law apply equally to in-state and out-of-state retailers for Commerce Clause issues. The Commerce Clause prevents states from interfering with interstate commerce. And so the New York case of Brown and Williamson versus Pataki is where actually the New York statute was upheld, but it does an interesting analysis of the Commerce Clause, finding that the way New York devised its shipment statute did comport with the Commerce Clause. But just so you know, that's something we have to keep in mind when we're looking at a total ban, or at really any restrictions. The types of provisions that we're going to see in state laws, I'm not going to get into too much detail about any particular law. If you are interested in knowing what your state law is, you can certainly reach out to the Public Health Law Center, Tobacco Control Legal Consortium, and we'll get you the answer to your question. But as you can see from this slide, some are based on age restrictions. Now, a lot of these age restrictions do tend to also, some of the restrictions also seem to apply to tax collection. So you'll see that throughout my presentation, that some relate to whether we're getting it to the right people and some relate to whether we're able to get the tax that we're due, but they often provisions do both things at one time. In any case, the age restrictions are customer affirmation, which actually Maureen showed you the slide from the blue website. That's a customer affirmation. That's, again, leaving it to the customer to say, yep, indeed, I'm old enough. Then there are checking of government-issued identification, so requiring the entry of your driver's license number or passport number or something like that into the website so that that's your verification. And then the third step could be verifying that identification against a commercially available database. So there are databases available to companies for a fee where they can do age verification based on that identification number. Very few states have all 3 of these components, the third being the most stringent. It was part of the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids model legislation. Philip Morris also had model legislation in this area, but only had the check of the government-issued identification. So again, you can see some states require 1, some states require 2 or 3 of those elements. And then with respect to the shipping name and address provisions, again, serves kind of both purposes, but so that we know who the shipment is actually going to. Some states require that the purchaser name match the name on the bank account or credit card issued. That way, if my son, underage, were to acquire my credit card but have something shipped to him, for example, maybe even at his friend's house, that would not work because my name is on the credit card or my name is on the bank account statement. So it's designed to interfere in that way. And again, similarly, some require that the shipping address match the address on your credit card or on your bank account that you're using for the same reasons that I indicated should a child gain access to the parent's information in that way. Then there are what we call the shipping documentation requirements, and that's like the bill of lading or the receipt that might be in the packaging. So some states require that that bill specifically indicate that the transaction is for the sale of cigarettes or tobacco products. That way, if I get that bill, I know that that's what was contained in that package. Some require that the outside packaging actually say that it contains cigarettes or tobacco products, so that, again, if it's left on my front porch and, you know, I see it but it has my kid's address, name on it, or what have you, I might know that that's what's in the packaging. None of these are, you know, perfect measures, but certainly are helpful. The other thing I wanted to point out is some of this is also, again, for tax collection, so that on the bills, it has to state what your tax obligations are as a purchaser. You know, if you made a purchase online, that you might still have tax obligations for the state in which you are. Then there's vendor licensing provisions. So some states, this is the functional equivalent of a ban, meaning they require that you obtain a retailer license. But in some states, like Maryland, you can only obtain a retail tobacco license if you have a brick and mortar establishment, if you have a fixed address. And so, again, functionally, that means it's a ban. But that's not true of all states, but some states do require that the vendor have a retailer license. That actually makes them easier to track to see if they're actually abiding by age restriction and tax collection practices. Some states also maintain a list of authorized tobacco retailers so that you as a consumer or as a regulator could check to see whether you know, a shipment is being made by an authorized retailer, so you could do a sting operation of those places that are not on the authorized list to see if they're willing to ship into your state. Again, it's a way for us to track, for a state to track where traffic might be coming from, where commerce might be coming from with this age-restricted product. And then there are penalty and enforcement provisions. Virtually all of the state laws do have, provide for some penalties to the sellers who violate, and they range dramatically from state to state with how much. Typically, it's a financial penalty that escalates with, or can often escalate with, repeated violations. Some of the states actually provide penalties for the purchasers. For our purposes with respect to youth, that's in addition to any state purchase, use, and possession violation. So if it's already a state law, as most states have, for the youth, it's a violation of the law for a youth to be in possession or to be using or purchasing the tobacco product, there can be an additional penalty in their shipping statute, in part, again, designed for tax collection purposes, but could be used, again, against a minor in addition to their PUP violation. And then the really tricky point, and this is something broadly across public health that we've been dealing with, is several states do make clear who the enforcement authority is, what agency or entity within the state is responsible for enforcement. It could be a collaboration between your licensing authority and your Attorney General's office or the like, but it should be stated in your law. And if it's not, then there's no one really accountable or responsible, and it can be tricky to actually, if you're working on a particular problem, finding out what entity or agency in your state should be taking lead on this. And that actually is something that could be challenged in court if there is an enforcement action. So again, this is broadly speaking with public health laws. We should be mindful that when passing a provision like this, it's clear who the enforcement authority is. And again, if there's a collaboration between agencies, that's clear. I'll just, so I told you about the successful case out of New York where their ban was upheld on Commerce Clause challenge, but the Maine did not succeed in its case. Maine had actually required that tobacco retailers use only carriers, common carriers, that verify the age of each tobacco purchaser, and that the carriers had responsibility for ensuring that tobacco was shipped, not shipped to unlicensed retailers. And this was designed, again, to really prevent youth access to tobacco products. The Supreme Court, unfortunately, found these provisions to be preempted by a federal law that before this case I had never heard of, but it's called the Q.U.I.T for those in the know, and it's the Federal Aviation Administration Authorization Act. That statute regulates common carriers and specifically states that states are not permitted to regulate in this area. So the case was Maine versus New Hampshire Motor Transport, and you can see the quote from the court syllabus here, that the Maine provisions were directly connected with the carrier service, meaning really applied to what the carrier was doing and was allowed to do, and therefore was part of the preemption that Congress had inserted. What's most important for us from a public health perspective is we had filed an amicus brief, as well as many others, hoping that the court would see a reason to provide an exception to the Q.U.I.T's preemption for the state's police powers or public health powers. Often those powers are seen as, incredibly important and thus, an appropriate exception to a preemption provision, but we were unsuccessful in persuading the court that the police powers or public health powers should create this exemption. There is nice language in some of the opinions of the court that they think Congress should fix this problem, but nevertheless the impact of the preemption that the Maine statute was struck down. Interestingly, the court makes clear that Maine could have banned all of the sales and had an outright ban, and that would have succeeded. It was that they were trying to interfere with the way that carriers were allowed to handle, had to handle the product. Interestingly, Maureen and I have had a conversation about whether we think this would be the same outcome. At the time of that case, not many of the carriers had identification check procedures, and now virtually all of them do. And so would the case come out differently if it was heard now, because it wouldn't really be asking for anything of the carriers that they're not already providing, even if it's a fee for that service that they're not already providing. So, but the bottom line is it's a narrow holding and should not curtail anyone from seeking, a good shipment ban or shipment restriction in the future. Then we're on to the public-private initiatives, and these are, again, sometimes at the initiative of the Attorney General under an enforcement provision. They threatened litigation or just reached out to these companies to say, hey, you're kind of part of the problem. We think you don't want to be. Why don't you be part of the solution? So by 2005, all the major shipping companies had agreed to stop shipping cigarettes directly to consumers, and this is for cigarettes, not necessarily to tobacco products. We've seen over the course of the last couple of years, not through this particular agreement with the Attorney General, but through the policies of the shipping companies, that they have expanded to tobacco products to some extent. They may not have a ban on the direct shipment of tobacco products, but they have restrictions, meaning age verification, packaging, labeling, and other requirements before tobacco products may be shipped. Of course, the federal government was last to the ballgame with the Postal Service coming on board a few years later, but they now have this convoluted process for personal delivery with age verification for non-cigarette tobacco products, for cigars and non-cigarette tobacco products. So the upside here is that most of the shippers wanted to be part of this and don't want to be part of shipping cigarettes directly to consumers. Then there was the credit card companies. So the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and the state attorneys general negotiated with the major credit card companies. They're already, generally speaking, credit card companies are not permitted to use their allow the credit card to be used for an illegal transaction. And many of these transactions, if not all of them, for the shipment of cigarettes online and sometimes tobacco products online are unlawful. So that was the hook that ATF and the state attorneys general used in negotiating with the major credit card companies. ATF was involved in large measure because Then, and still to some extent today, it was thought that the internet sale of tobacco products was being used to fund terrorists and organized crime, and they wanted in on, they have the regulatory power over tobacco products, and so they wanted in on this action with the attorneys general. So essentially the major credit card companies have agreed to prohibit the use of credit card for illegal internet or mail order cigarette purchases, and importantly, they will investigate and take action against any websites that make illegal sales if notified by an appropriate law enforcement agency. So even if someone gets through their radar, which is entirely possible, but it's identified by law enforcement as making illegal sales and reported to the credit card companies, they will investigate and take appropriate action. Principally, they will just ban the use of cards for that website. It's just easier for them to do it that way. And then the third type of public-private initiative really came with the tobacco manufacturers. This was Philip Morris and Lorillard in 2006, kind of one earlier in the year and one during the spring. I think Philip Morris was first, and then Lorillard in the spring came along. And they essentially agreed to terminate shipment of cigarettes to directly to consumers that the Attorney Generals have found to be engaging in illegal internet or mail order sales. So, you know, if you've been identified as someone who's operating an unlawful internet website to sell cigarettes, the manufacturers will not, you know, ship product to you. They will also engage in certain practices designed to reduce the amount of product that they're shipping directly to any consumer and not to a warehouse or a distributor, and that is also designed to reduce the accessibility of those products to be then resold on the internet. And then finally, any vendor found to be in violation of any of these shipment bans or shipment regulations would be suspended from the tobacco companies' incentive programs, which actually can be very lucrative for them. So they get compensated additional monies for promoting certain products or for making certain sales or engaging in other kind of marketing practices, and they can actually make a substantial amount of money on that. So it's a pretty big hit to lose those incentives. And I just wanted to give a state-specific example as I'm closing out here of what could happen in a particular, you know, jurisdiction. So this was in California, and actually it was a collaborative arrangement between California and New York. They investigated a particular bank with respect to its online sale or processing of online transactions for tobacco retailers, warned them many times to stop. When the bank did not, they did an undercover, or I called it under keyboard because I think I'm funny, investigation by the Attorney General office finding those rampant violations. And so then the First Regional did agree to certain terms to really restrict, if not, you know, outright prohibit the use of their bank as a means to process payments from those websites that were selling cigarettes unlawfully. So that very quickly was an overview of some of the state laws and the public-private partnerships. And on that note, I hand the ball over to Maureen.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. You covered a lot of really great information for us. So I'm going to switch it to talking about, there we go, a couple of laws on the federal level, the PACT Act and the Tobacco Control Act. High-level summary, the PACT Act regulates the internet-based retailers who sell cigarettes and smokeless tobacco. The Tobacco Control Act directs the FDA to issue a regulation of internet tobacco sales, but that hasn't happened quite yet. So as Kathy mentioned, in 2005 and 2006, the UPS and FedEx signed agreements with the Attorney General of New York promising not to transport cigarettes and smokeless tobacco. So let's play find the loophole, right? If you were a retailer based on the internet, what are you going to do? Probably use the USPS, right? The United States Mail to ship your products. So the PACT Act closed that loophole, also known as the Prevent All Cigarette Trafficking Act, closed the loophole by declaring cigarettes and smokeless tobacco non-mailable. In addition, it requires age verification at purchase and signature and ID verification again at delivery, but you have to check the fine print because this rule applies to the internet-based retailer, not the delivery company. You'll actually notice a theme here. So in addition, it allows states to prohibit the shipment of cigarettes and smokeless tobacco to customers and residential addresses, but And as Kathy mentioned, there are a good number of states that do this. But again, looking at the fine print, the rule only regulates the action of the retailer, not the carrier, right? So in this context, there's a difference between ship and transport, and it's not that picture. It's, right, the shipper is the person who takes an item to the UPS store, pays for it to be delivered. In this case, that's the internet-based retailer who's the shipper, and the transporter, right, is the delivery company. The Act specifically preempts state laws which would regulate the delivery carrier. So, right, the picture here, he's hiding. You can't get to him. States can only regulate the internet-based retailer, but not the delivery carrier. Now, the Act does take some action against the delivery company. What it does is it requires internet-based retailers to follow state laws as if their sale occurred in the state. Then it prohibits delivery carriers from accepting orders from the retailers who have been found to violate that law. So the rule says the carriers at least have to know who they're contracting with. If they claim they don't know what's in the packages, they have to know who they're working with. So they can't accept orders from retailers that are on this scofflaw list. But unfortunately, we have another exemption. The fine print on this one leaves out the major delivery carriers. And here's a quote from the bill sponsor. He's basically saying that because of those agreements with the Attorney General of New York that Kathy talked about, the major delivery carriers are exempt. But what's funny is that New York is currently in litigation with UPS and FedEx about whether they're actually complying with those agreements. So they're still enjoying the benefit of exemption from the PACT Act, even if maybe they're not keeping up their end of the deal for why they got that exemption in the first place. So here is a summary of what the PACT Act does when it comes to youth access. It relates only to cigarettes and smokeless tobacco. It declares those products non-mailable. It says that the internet-based retailers are prohibited from selling to youth, that they have to use a delivery service that will check ID. It allows states to completely prohibit shipment to customers, but it exempts and preempts regulation of delivery companies. It does prohibit the delivery companies from accepting shipment orders from scofflaw internet retailers, the ones that are not following the law. And the tax issues are a big part of the PACT Act, but that is a topic for a separate webinar, so we won't be going into that right now. And now we're going to move on to a quick summary of how the Tobacco Control Act relates to internet sales. So when the Act was passed, it had a provision that directed the FDA to develop a regulation of non-face-to-face sales of tobacco, basically the internet and mail order sales. And what you can see here, this is a picture of regulations.gov. This is a website you can go to keep an eye on what the FDA is doing and what regulations or requests for information they have. So this is called an advance notice of proposed rulemaking. Basically what that means is they haven't issued a rule yet, but they did collect information that would help inform that rule. So this page you can see, I think the comment period closed back in 2011, and so far we still haven't seen a regulation come out of that. But one thing that I should point out is that the regulation is likely to include e-cigarettes. Let me see if I can explain why in a sort of straightforward and clear manner, but basically the Tobacco Control Act says that this non-face-to-face regulation will cover tobacco products. And right now the FDA is in the process of declaring e-cigarettes to be tobacco products. That's, if you've heard of people talk about the deeming regulation, that's what that is. And if you'd like more information about that, you can check out our website. We have a page, the FDA Tobacco Action Center. You can learn a lot more about what the deeming regulation is, where it is in the process. I think people have been saying for a bit we're expecting it any day now, but still haven't quite seen it. But it does appear to propose to declare e-cigarettes to be tobacco products, which means that this internet sales regulation would likely also cover tobacco products, also cover e-cigarettes as a tobacco product. So that's just a quick overview of federal laws that relate to youth access to tobacco online. Now I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca to to talk about some of her fascinating research on how these laws that we've talked about are actually working in practice. Thank you guys so much.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. So my team at the Internet Tobacco Vendor Study has been studying websites to sell cigarettes and other tobacco products for 16 years now. Much has changed and much has stayed the same. In recent years, in the absence of regulation, online e-cigarette sales have exploded in popularity, helping e-cigarettes become a $2.5 billion a year industry projected to reach $17 billion by the year 2017. It's easier than ever to access the products without ever leaving your home. Blue e-cigarettes, as mentioned earlier, and as far back as 2012, the Lorillard-owned Blue e-cigarette website was averaging 3 to 5 orders per minute during peak times, and that didn't include retail store sales. The online e-cigarette industry sales for 2014 were estimated at $650 million, and that's sure to have increased in the 2 years since. While some Internet tobacco vendor websites look pretty low-tech, more and more we're seeing flashy websites using modern graphics and sexy imagery to their advantage to push e-cigs online and convince people that they're an appealing and safe replacement for cigarettes. In April 2014, the FDA announced its intent to regulate e-cigarettes and other tobacco products. But the process is time-consuming, and although they say we may hear something any day now, it will take probably 3 to 4 years from that announcement before far-reaching regulations are in place. And in the meantime, the e-cigarette industry can continue unfettered by regulation. So why should you be concerned about the online sale of tobacco products? Online tobacco sales pose several threats to public health that we need to be concerned about. The first is that historically, most online tobacco vendors offer cheap prices through tax avoidance, depriving governments of millions of dollars in tax revenue, much of which was used to fund public health programs. This is the first website that comes up when you search buy cigarettes online. They sell all of the major brands at cheap prices. If you're living in a high excise tax area like New York City, you could be paying upwards of $150 a carton for premium brands like Marlboro. But here you can get them for a fraction of the price at $21, evading taxes as you go. They even call it out right on the front page. And in 2011, 2/3 of Internet cigarette vendors featured one or more tax evasion claims on their websites. The second threat posed by ITV sales is that access to cheap tobacco products online undermines the public health benefits of raising taxes, that is, reduced initiation and increased cessation. Research has shown that as cigarette prices rise, cigarette consumption drops considerably, so having cheap cigarettes available online undermines this effect. Buying online can save you a ton of money. A pack-a-day New York City Marlboro smoker is spending about $5,400 a year on cigarettes, but you can buy them online as cheaply as $15 a carton. Doing so could potentially save you over $4,800 a year. That's huge to a price-sensitive smoker, particularly young price-sensitive smokers. Another way that smokers are responding to rising cigarette prices is switching to cheaper replacement products and little cigars that are, to the consumer, nearly indistinguishable from cigarettes. Our researchers found LCCs online as cheaply as 59 cents per carton. Even if you assume that the average smoker isn't going to be as adept at searching out the cheapest prices as my research team, if we went with the lowest interquartile range of $14 per carton, the smoker would still save nearly $4,900 per year. The FSPTCA defines cigarettes as any product that looks like a cigarette, is promoted like a cigarette, and is marketed to and or sought out by consumers seeking cigarettes. Or in other words, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. Little cigars are purchased by and large by people seeking a cheaper equivalent to cigarettes, and little cigars are taxed at much lower rates than cigarettes. They should be considered as equivalent products to cigarettes under federal law and taxed at the same rate as cigarettes, whether they're called cigars or not. And the third, and in my opinion, most important public health threat posed by Internet tobacco sales is that ITVs do a terrible job of age verification. Most ITVs use self-age verification if they use any at all. Our research shows that 26% of Internet cigarette vendors rely on a checkbox or click-through button like this one to verify age. With e-cigarette vendors, it's even higher, 46%. We also found that 38% of Internet cigarette vendors ask the user to enter their date of birth to verify age. Of course, either of these age verification methods can be forwarded by simply lying about your age. The public health community has done a pretty good job of restricting youth access to cigarettes in retail stores. State compliance checks show that the rates of sales to minors have dropped to 9% or lower. In comparison, the internet is still the Wild West. In 2001, my team had teens try to buy cigarettes online. Without ever providing ID, they had a 92% success rate. Back then, online age verification was primitive. Now there are state and federal laws banning online cigarette sales to minors and requiring age verification, partly as a result of our work. We did another study in 2003 to assess compliance with California's groundbreaking youth access law for internet cigarette sales, one of over 30 such state laws passed. None of the vendors complied with the law. But if you go after one vendor, they can just close down their website, redirecting traffic to a new and different URL, and continue with their online sales. With cross-border sales and issues of jurisdiction further complicating enforcement of state laws affecting internet vendors, it was clear that a new approach to regulating ITVs was needed. My research team developed the Q.U.I.T, or Quarantine of Unhealthy Internet Trade framework, as a model for how regulators might intervene with internet tobacco vendors and disrupt their distribution channels for getting their products from the manufacturer to the retailer to the consumer. We theorized that if the vendor were cut off from their manufacturers, web hosts, payment processors, and/or delivery companies, that it would make it very difficult for them to do business and get illegal products to their customers. And this was followed by regulatory reform, which we heard about. State laws restricting internet tobacco sales were notoriously hard to enforce due to interstate and international jurisdictional issues, and due to the general difficulty of determining the location of sale and internet purchases that have a customer in one location, a website hosted in another, a business located in yet another, and products being shipped from still another location, all of which may be in different states or countries. In 2005, the federal government put aspects of our Q.U.I.T framework to use with the payment and shipping bans for internet cigarette sales, and we did follow-up research to gauge their effect. But the ban agreements were problematic, as has been noted. With millions of merchant clients, often with generic names that do not reflect the nature of the products they sell, it was probably difficult for the credit card companies to effectively enforce the new ban, particularly with overseas clients, which resulted in almost 40% of vendors continuing to accept credit cards. Those that complied with the new policies simply switched to non-banned forms of payment like e-checks and PayPal-like services. The shipping ban had a gaping loophole in that it didn't include the U.S. Postal Service. While a few vendors continued to use the banned shippers, the rest, 93% of vendors, just shipped via the USPS. The bans still had substantial effect. We saw the highest ever rate of vendors going out of business year to year, but so many new vendors entered the marketplace that the overall number of vendors increased. They definitely adapted to exploit the loopholes in the agreements, and many moved overseas to avoid the perceived need to comply with U.S. regulations for sales to U.S. customers. The 2009 PACT closed that USPS loophole and upheld the existing shipping bans, closing off most viable shipping options for online cigarette sales and required strict age verification procedures. Although it exempted the major common carriers, it was because of the agreements that were already in place with them, and it specified that if they vacated those agreements, that they too would be subject to the PACT Act. But PACT has yet to be effectively enforced. 2 years after it was signed, only 11% of internet cigarette vendors advertised using a method of age verification, like collecting your driver's license information, that could comply with the law, and almost all vendors were still shipping via the USPS. In 2014, we conducted a youth purchase study where no orders were rejected due to age verification, and all were delivered by the U.S. Postal Service. Unfortunately, currently, PACT doesn't apply to e-cigarettes. It needs to be expanded to apply to all tobacco products and judiciously enforced. With the Internet Tobacco Vendor Study, we annually go to great lengths to identify as close as we can to the current population of Internet tobacco vendors using several sources. At our last round of data collection, my staff manually screened over 32,000 unique URLs to determine if they were ITVs. We found over 2,500 ITVs, including 560 websites selling cigarettes, 479 selling little cigars, over 1,000 selling e-cigarettes, and over 1,400 selling other tobacco products like hookah. We've been taking a deep dive into hundreds of the most popular websites in each of those categories, but unfortunately I don't have time today to share nearly all of that with you. But we've had some fascinating and sometimes surprising findings. So, for example, there's an alarming trend of people taking a DIY approach to vaping, mixing and often selling e-liquids out of their homes completely without regulatory oversight or even proper instruction in the handling of these highly dangerous chemicals. We found many websites that sell pure nicotine, with teensy amount of which could kill you, and it's available in sizes ranging from half liter to a 55-gallon drum of pure nicotine. There's a real risk of e-liquids going down drains and potentially poisoning water supplies, or people intentionally using liquid nicotine to poison people via their drinks, bath water, hot tubs, swimming pools. The possibilities are endless. The FDA should establish limits on the sizes and concentrations of e-liquid bottles that can be purchased without a valid tobacco product manufacturer or wholesaler license. FDA should also require a full listing of e-liquid ingredients, banning any not approved as safe for vaporizing and inhaling by the FDA. Some products labeled nicotine-free actually list nicotine in their ingredients list, so we should also require that products labeled as nicotine-free actually be nicotine-free. E-cigarette vendors also make a wide variety of claims about the advantages of e-cigs over traditional cigarettes, like that they're healthier, cheaper, that they can help you circumvent smoke-free laws, that they're safer than secondhand smoke, and that they can help you quit smoking. Now, that last one in particular is heavily debated in the scientific literature. And while many vendors may be reluctant to overtly claim their product helps you quit smoking for fear of the forthcoming regulations that would prohibit it, 17% of vendors include conflicting claims on their website. So, for example, one claimed that their product has never been tested or proven as a cessation device, although many have used it as such. Others included official claims that e-cigs are not a smoking cessation product, but accompanied them with prominently featured customer testimonials that read like marketing copy, such as, "It can be very difficult for a chain smoker to quit her or his habit, but with an e-cigarette, this is no longer necessary." Or, "Even if you feel that smoking is an impossible habit to quit, this tool has helped millions around the world to stop smoking once and for all." That sounds more like marketing copy than a legitimate customer testimonial. The FDA should prohibit pro-health claims, including customer testimonials and blogs, on websites and marketing materials unless they can be scientifically proven and have been approved by the FDA for that specific product. When it comes to payment and shipping methods used by e-cigarette vendors, 97% accept credit cards, 23% accept PayPal, both of which are banned for cigarettes. The U.S. Postal Service is the most commonly offered shipping carrier, but there is no age verification at delivery in our most recent purchase studies, and that's the only opportunity in the sales transaction for a face-to-face age verification is required for cigarettes by the PACT Act. All the vendors offered shippers currently banned for cigarettes. Extending the PACT Act and the related regulations to include e-cigarettes would cut off most payment and shipping options for these online vendors. Not surprisingly, in the absence of federal regulations requiring them to do so, e-cig vendors did very little to verify their customers' age. 62% rely exclusively on age verification strategies that simply don't work, like clicking a button to indicate you're of age. 6% don't even do that. Only 2.5% required a driver's license to verify age, and while 6.5% claim to verify age at delivery, our research has shown that in cases like this, advertised and actual practices vary quite a bit. Extending the PACT Act to include e-cigs would put in place strong age verification requirements, but as we've seen with cigarettes, lack of enforcement would result in little compliance. North Carolina was among the first states to pass a law requiring age verification for the online sale of e-cigarettes. It required age verification against government ID databases at the point of order. So we had teams buy e-cigarettes online to assess the vendors' age verification practices and their compliance with North Carolina's law. Only 5 orders out of 98 were rejected due to age verification, and 95% of the received orders were simply left at the door. There was no age verification at delivery, and none complied with PACT Act level age verification. While 7 claimed to use age verification methods that complied with North Carolina law, only 1 actually did. And all the orders in the study were received via delivery companies that are banned from shipping cigarettes, underscoring the need to expand the PACT Act to include e-cigarettes as well. We also did a youth cigarette purchase study at the same time. Our findings were rather unexpected compared to our cigarette purchase studies done in years past. We found that since PACT, many vendors have gone out of business or moved overseas. We were aiming for a sample of 100 vendors, but due to so many vendors going out of business, we ultimately attempted purchases from only 70, and we only actually received 22 orders. But it wasn't because of age verification. In fact, no orders failed due to age verification at the point of order, and there were no attempts to verify age at delivery. The failed orders failed due to issues with payment or processing. All of the packages were delivered by the U.S. Postal Service in violation of the PACT Act. But the big surprise of this study was widespread fraud. On the credit cards we opened expressly for the study, each of which were only used for a few purchases, we experienced well over $7,000 in fraudulent charges. And that's a huge amount considering that we only spent about $1,700 ordering cigarettes. Some double charged us for products, some charged us for products they didn't deliver or for purchases from other websites. Many sites appeared to be broken when you tried to place an order, but were likely actually collecting and stealing credit card information from people seeking to evade taxes by buying cheap cigarettes online. Some of the fraudsters waited many months to make fraudulent charges. For the average buyer, there would be no clue to tie these charges back to the online cigarette purchase they made months earlier. So in the wake of the PACT Act, even without active enforcement, the ranks of Internet cigarette vendors have diminished. With so many fraudulent enterprises that people trying to evade taxes and skirt federal laws and trying to buy their cigarettes online may be more likely to experience credit card fraud than they are to actually get cigarettes. Next, I'm going to talk about flavored products. In 2009, the FSPTCA banned flavored cigarettes because of their high youth appeal. But rather than the products disappearing from the market, what happened was that the manufacturers essentially relabeled their products as cigars and continued to sell them. Can you tell the difference between the product on the left and on the right? The product on the right is Jarum Black closed cigarettes. On the left, it's Jarum Black closed cigars. The packaging and the product look nearly identical. The sticks on the right have the brand logo just below the gold line, and the ones on the left have the logo just above the gold line. The most notable difference is that the cigars are sold in packs of 12 instead of 20. After the ban, the flavored cigarettes remained widely available online. Most vendors were still selling flavored cigarettes 2 years after the ban. We also did research on Google search trends related to the Jarum closed cigarettes and their Jarum closed cigars. The month after the flavor ban was implemented, consumer searches for both products reached an all-time high. Searches for Jarum cigarettes remained as high as their historic trend through 2011, showing very little sign of dropping. And while Jarum cigars were introduced following the flavored cigarette ban, their search levels never reached as high as their illegal counterparts, staying well below the level of searches for Jarum cigarettes, probably because they remained widely available from online vendors that popped up on the first page of search results for either search term. As I said before, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. Based on our evidence, flavored little cigars should be treated as equivalent products to cigarettes and banned under the FSPTCA. And it's not just closed-flavored cigarettes that are a concern. Cigarettes, little cigars, and e-cigarettes come in a wide variety of flavors, and research has shown that flavored tobacco products are flavored with the same chemicals as popular candies and sugary drinks like Jolly Ranchers and Kool-Aid. As the study's author said, we are seeing truly candy-flavored tobacco. And many of these chemicals are approved by the FDA for ingestion, but not for inhalation. Let's not forget that safe to eat does not mean safe to vaporize and inhale. Some of the most common flavoring chemicals, like diacetyl and cinnamaldehyde, are highly toxic when inhaled. So the FDA should ban the use of flavoring chemicals that have not been proven safe for vaporization and inhalation at high temperatures and high-voltage e-cigarettes. The high youth appeal of flavored cigarettes is a major concern because unlike flavored cigarettes, unlike flavored cigarettes, they are completely unregulated and growing in popularity among teen e-cigarette users, 40% of which have never even smoked cigarettes. And flavor products are their entry point. 100% of teen e-cigarette users have used flavored e-cigarette products, and 90% of them started with a flavored product. Flavors are a major selling point for many e-cigarette vendors, including this one that boasts over 1,200 flavors. A recent study found nearly 8,000 unique flavors of e-cigarettes on the Internet market. Restrictions on flavored e-cigarettes should be one of the first e-cigarette regulations issued by the FDA, but unfortunately, that may be still several years away. In our research, we found flavored e-cigarettes available from 80% of online vendors, with fruit and candy flavors being the most popular. Some had wild flavor names like Atomic Cinnacide and Peanut Butter Jesus. Some tried to mimic popular drinks like Energy Cow, which mimicked Red Bull, and Purple Drank, which despite being described here as a grape drink, is a common slang term for a drink mixed with powerful prescription cough medicine. A lot can happen in 4 years. We did a study of Google search trends around e-cigarettes, and from 2009 to 2013, there was a 334% increase in Google searches for e-cig keywords. Our research showed that in addition to the other claims about the benefits of e-cigarettes, like the ones you see listed here, 32% of online e-cigarette vendors claim that their products are a cessation device. So we thought that there may be a lot of people out there searching for information about using e-cigarettes to quit smoking, but that wasn't the case. In fact, most e-cig searches are for e-cig brands and are looking for places to buy e-cigs online. Very few people were searching for health or cessation concerns, so few that you can barely see the purple cessation blips on this graph. We also found that the most popular brands sold at retail stores and the most searched brands online had very little crossover. We found very few instances of popular retail store brands being sold online. It appears that the online and offline markets are reaching different customer bases and with different brands of products. So it's continuing to monitor the online market for e-cigarettes and other tobacco products remains very important. Some final regulatory recommendations. Federal regulation of e-cigarettes and other tobacco products may go far toward reducing the number of vendors and products reaching U.S. customers. Lessons learned from the regulation of online cigarette sales can be applied to the regulation of other tobacco products. In fact, many of the existing regulations could be amended and expanded to cover all tobacco products. All tobacco products should require Surgeon General's warnings on the packaging and website, including warning about the risk of specific constituent chemicals, and the FDA should require licensure and product approval for all tobacco product manufacturers so that they can track companies creating and selling products and so that licenses can be revoked if they violate regulations. Enforcement of tobacco regulations is crucial to their success. 2 years after the PACT Act and the FSP/TCA, nearly half of American cigarette vendors were using banned shipping methods, and 84% of all vendors were using the U.S. Postal Service for shipping in direct violation of the PACT Act. Better enforcement by U.S. Customs and by the U.S. Postal Service is needed to stop illicit packages from making it to consumers. Also, despite the FSP/TCA bans on light and flavored cigarettes, nearly all vendors were still selling them 2 years later. The FDA needs to implement and enforce fines and domain seizures for violating vendors and penalties and fines for delivery companies and payment processors who are a party to illegal transactions yet have not yet been subject to these sorts of enforcement actions so far. The U.S. has made great strides in tobacco control regulation in the past 20 years, but e-cigarettes are exploding in popularity and internet sales are still the wild, wild west, with very little compliance with or enforcement of the few regulations that have been passed affecting those sales. And many companies find ways to modify their products and practices to sidestep regulatory efforts. My team will continue to do detailed analyses of the sales and marketing practices of ITV websites to provide the research evidence to inform FDA's development of regulations and enforcement plans in the years to come.
This is Maureen O'Brien. I noticed that we got started a little bit late, so we don't have a lot of time for questions at the end, but feel free to send me an email, and I will get back to you if you have questions I can answer. Thank you so much to our speakers and everyone here who came to listen to the great information that we had on the internet sales of tobacco products.